Favorite country? Oh, I loved biking through maybe Slovenia. It was just so beautiful. I mean, it was short, actually. It's like not a huge country, but just like all of the landscape there was absolutely incredible. Mountains, lakes, just like, when you feel like you're properly in nature rather than kind of like in a park. Albania was also very like amazing. It felt like more of an adventure than anywhere else because of some of the lack of infrastructure and some of the ways that my map sent me wrong and some of the wild camping spots that I loved. I think Albania was also, yeah, maybe even my favorite actually.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, my name is Bella Malloy and I'm very excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of the Seek Travel Ride podcast, Tess Meyer. Tess has undertaken not one but two long-distance cycle tours. The first a 3,000 kilometre trip through New Zealand, and from there she set her sights on something even bigger, recently completing a trip that would take her from London all the way to Turkey. I'm really looking forward to diving into the details of these trips with Tess and learning more about her experiences as a bicycle traveller. Tess, welcome to the show.
Hello.
I am so excited to be speaking with you today, Tess, and like I said, learning a lot more about the details of your trips. I feel there's going to be a few good stories come out of these trips for sure. But what I do like to do, and I ask this question for all my guests first and foremost, is, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
I'm not sure about the first bike I rode myself, but I remember always going on, on the front of the bikes that my parents were riding when I was really little, like even too small to ride one. And then pretty sure we had those, those plastic ones that toddlers have that they just kind of run along on.
Yes.
Started from the ground, just running along on them. And then I would have just had I've got two older brothers, and I would have just had their hand-me-downs as they outgrew them. But there were definitely always bikes around, that's for sure.
Brilliant. And it's one of those things, I grew up, and my listeners probably already know this about me, my first bike was a hand-me-down bike. I'm one of 6 kids, so there were, and one of the youngest there as well. But it sort of never mattered if it belonged to a sibling before it belonged to you. Like, once it becomes your bike, it's like the best thing ever. Well, it was in my experience. Were you a bit the same?
Yeah, yeah. And I definitely, yeah, I loved it. And when I got my first bike as well, like a little mountain bike, that was definitely very exciting because I'm from Wellington in New Zealand, and there's a lot of good mountain biking around there. But then I definitely kind of lost interest with it a bit. There's so many exciting things going on. And I'd say from the ages of like probably around 10 to 20, when I did my first big tour, I was only really riding bikes every now and then to get around and, to and from work and this kind of thing. So yeah, it was definitely a sudden shock going from that to, okay, cool, let's try 3000K.
Yeah, and I guess there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about quickly there before we dive into your first trip. If my listeners can pick up from your accent, so you are a Kiwi, you're from New Zealand, that's correct. And
Yeah.
for anyone who's ever seen photos of New Zealand, been to New Zealand on a holiday, or even are from there, like, it is just, to me, it's like one of the outdoor capitals of the world. Outdoors and adventures, I feel, goes hand in hand with that beautiful, beautiful country. And I have this thought as an Australian across the ditch that people growing up in New Zealand, like, I feel like adventure and outdoors maybe is part of their genetics and in their blood. Did you feel like the outdoors played a big part of your role or part of your life growing up and in your childhood as well?
I mean, definitely. My parents were pretty into it as well, which is always helpful. I think sometimes people growing up in the city don't get as much of it, but absolutely, always at the beach growing up, and always, if it's not at the beach, then the river, or going for bushwalks or hikes or running around. Or our house was on like a track on a hill because, I mean, a lot of the houses in Wellington it's very hilly. So, just playing in the bush between the houses and this kind of thing as well. We used to play man vs wild out there and just like, yeah, really get in amongst it. So I've always been a bit messy because of it, but I think it's more fun this way.
Definitely. So, Tess, you mentioned that mountain biking was something that you took part in when you were thinking about cycling growing up there because you had access to local mountain bike trails. So I guess then when I think about the first cycle tour you did, which you called and I need to find out if I'm pronouncing this right. I've got a Tour of Aotearoa. Now, is that correct?
Yeah, the Tour of Aotearoa, which means Land of the Long White Cloud. It's the name for New Zealand, for those that don't know.
I've always seen it written down and known it's about New Zealand, but I've never known how to pronounce it. I should have put it into Google. But on that tour, and that was 3,000 kilometres, that was undertaken mostly off-road, wasn't it?
Yeah, so two-thirds of that one is on basically unpaved road, which can be anything from old farm roads, back roads that are just gravel, to absolute rock, to, yeah, proper multi-day mountain biking, beautiful trails like the Timber Trail and the Bridge to Nowhere and these kind of things that, I mean, Bridge to Nowhere is also a hiking track as well. That's kind of, you go into it and you ride it, and then you have to get on a boat at the other end because you can't really get out. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's gorgeous. It was misleading in terms of, I didn't realize how populated Europe was. Obviously, coming from quite a large country with quite a small population, it was beautiful and quiet and serene for so much of the time. Whereas going across Europe, there were, yeah, so many people, and there aren't really spaces between towns here. It's quite strange to find.
Yeah, that really is something that strikes you. I certainly know it as an Australian. I feel like people's perception of distances in Europe compared to what we perceive distances and vast distances are in Australia, and possibly the same in New Zealand as well, are just so vastly different. You know, in Australia you could drive for hours and maybe, depending where you are, not even hit another township. I think here in Europe, if you went 5 kilometres between a village in some places, that's a vast distance. But I do want to talk about your experience then on that first trip going across through New Zealand. So that was 3,000 kilometres. Did you start in the North Island and finish in the South Island?
So we actually ended up, I did it with a friend of mine, Brie, and we actually ended up doing it in two halves, 2 years apart. So yeah, so we started in Cape Reinga right at the top, and then we went all the way down to Wellington, where we're both from, which is bottom of the North Island, right in the center of the country. And then, we had to go back to work basically. We were both lifeguarding at the time. Yeah, and then the second half we did 2 years later. There were 2 weeks between Christmas Day and a festival I really wanted to go to. So put our heads down and yeah, did the last 1,500K in that 2 weeks.
A tour like that, separated so distinctly in two halves, what experiences, because I have this as a question between the differences between how you set out for your tour in New Zealand and how you set out to tackle your tour across Europe. But what differences then did you change in that time between part one and part two of your tour through New Zealand?
Part one had a huge focus on, we were trying to make an impact along the way. And we were raising money for Sustainable Coastlines, a charity back home, and also giving a presentation that they were doing at schools. It was called Love Your Coast. They taught that to us, and we were giving that presentation to schools, the more rural schools that we found along the route. So that took quite a lot of our time because we were stopping to give these presentations and we were finding which schools to go to and this kind of thing. And also signing up cafes for a thing called Refill NZ, basically a big catalogue of where you can fill up your water bottle and they're not going to give you any hassle for it. So with the second one, with having less time, it was a little bit less focused on we didn't do any presentations on that side, but we were still raising money for Guardians of the Kapiti Island Marine Reserve. And the second one was also a bit, we were trying to go faster, we knew that we could do it, we knew that we could ride, we'd done one before. And so, we were pushing ourselves physically a lot more. Brie, my friend that I did it with, she's an ultra marathon swimmer. So definitely someone to catch up to.
She'd have a good set of endurance lungs on her. I've not actually heard of ultra marathon in a swimming context before, actually. Is that a little like open water swims or?
Yeah, open water swims. So at the time, when I first had the idea to cycle the length of the country, it just came about totally spontaneously. Like I was on my way to work at the pool and I remember thinking, oh, I wonder how long it'd take to bike the length of the country. Just, it was a thought experiment. It wasn't something that I was actually going to do. And I get there and Brie was working and I mentioned it to her, knowing that at the time she was training to swim the Cook Strait, which is the water between the North Island and the South Island of New Zealand. It's like a 26-kilometre strait.
That's a lot of laps of a swimming pool.
Yeah, yeah. It's whatever 26 times 40 is. It's 1,040 laps of a swimming pool, but it's in the sea and you're in togs, not a wetsuit, and there's the currents and all of that as well. She was training for that. And I remember saying, oh, I was just thinking about how long it would take to do this thing. And she was like, oh, you should do it. You should absolutely do it. And I was thinking, oh, no, 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 absolutely not. I'm in no way equipped to do this. And then she said, because she thought I was serious though. And then she said, oh, you should really do it. I'd do it with you. And I thought she was serious. And we later found out that neither of us actually were. But, we were too far in at that point and we'd committed to doing it. And yeah, it's one of the best decisions I'd ever made.
I absolutely love hearing that, because what it reminds me of, it's sort of like making a commitment. It's one of those things to think something in your mind, but as soon as you speak it out loud and someone else hears it, it's almost like you've just made yourself accountable for it. And I love that neither of you were thinking you could do it, but I'll do it with you. And so you've unwittingly just spurred yourself on for an adventure which creates memories of a lifetime as well.
Absolutely. I'm so glad I had her to do the first one with. It's always great doing it with a friend, and doing it with such an inspiring friend as well was super special. So
I'm sure if she was sat opposite, she would probably have the same sort of ways of describing yourself as well, Tess. I think you need inspiring friendships when you're doing a tour as a team of two. I think you each become each other's inspiration for those ultimate mismatches where one of you is having a high moment and one of you is having a low moment as well.
oh yeah, we definitely took turns. We definitely took turns on that. There were days where one of us would be feeling bad for whatever reason, and then the other one, you could just tell, would have to kind of just like pick up the slack and egg the other one on, and we'd absolutely take turns in that.
Did you find that there was a rhythm in what would spur on a high or a low moment? Was it linked to the terrain or fatigue? Was it a case of being hungry and tired, or weather related?
It always depended, and I think it was different for both of us as well. For me, I was really scared of riding at night. My vision gets really bad when it gets dark. Would be on the way to the campsite and I'd say, oh, is that it? And we'd be like, no, it's a cemetery. It's like, so I think for me, it was more like if we weren't getting the Ks in that we were meant to get in before dark, I would get a bit anxious about that and that kind of thing, or, running out of food and this kind of thing. Whereas I think for Brie, it was a bit different. She hated the traffic, riding on the road. There were different things.
Yeah.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, it's me, Bella from the show. I just wanted to let you know about something exciting. I have recently just created a new Facebook group named Seek Travel Ride, where if you are a fan of the show, you can join and we can actually bring this community more to life. It's a place where you can learn more about our guests, see more photos, chat about episodes in more detail, and maybe even pose some questions as well. It's also a place where you can share your own bicycle adventure journeys. Whether you've got a photo or a blog or some videos that you want to share, come online, say hi, join the Facebook group, and let's enjoy this community that we have built. We have a global audience here. People are listening from all around the world, and I think we can only thrive and get an even greater sense of wanderlust by sharing our experiences with each other and connecting. So get onto Facebook. I've provided a link in the show notes and you can join that community as well. Thank you. Now back to the show. Yeah, I could imagine. And because, like you were saying at the start there, was it 2/3 of your tour was off-road?
Yeah. So only 1/3 of the tour is on sealed road. So it's not all completely off-road, but it's on, the kinds of road that you'd have a hard go on a road bike, that's for sure.
And just knowing the scenery in New Zealand is mind-blowing. There's some great mountain ranges there as well.
Oh yeah, and the tour hits a lot of them as well.
Now, I must admit, I've actually only ever been to the South Island. But when I think of some of the mountain passes in the South Island, I'm thinking of like Haast Pass and Arthur's Pass.
Yep. Yeah, we did Haas Pass. We did the Crown Range between Wanaka and Queenstown. We did, yeah, those are actually my favorite days. I love finding a hill to climb for most of the day and then to get to the top, celebrate, enjoy the view, have some food, and then just ride the sweet descent to the finishing place.
Amazing. And the scenery there, I wonder, is the scenery just as mind blowing for you?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah. In fact, I think it started to get a little bit annoying for Brie every time we every time we go around a corner. I'd be like, "Wow, look at this," and she'd be like, "I know, it's amazing. I can see it." And actually, the South Island tour that we'd done, I'd been between the places in the North Island quite often because I was born in Auckland and I had a lot of family up there. So that stretch of road I was relatively familiar with. Whereas the South Island, I really hadn't explored much at all. Before the tour, I'd been to Christchurch, Dunedin, and the top of the South Island a little bit, but that was it. And so I was exploring everywhere we went for the first time, and yeah, just finding these amazing places. I'm so happy that the first time I did that was by bike because it made it super, super special. Yeah.
There's something also just about discovering a place on a bicycle, and I feel like the listeners to this show have an affinity with that. But it's slow travel, and I guess you can get even purer if you're hiking. Perhaps in your friend's case, if you're swimming, it's definitely
Yeah.
slow travel. But again, when you're arriving somewhere by bike, just the appreciation of the landscape changes slowly as you make your way. You understand what those distances are like as well. It is just a totally different experience than, say, arriving by a car, a train, a bus, a plane, or any other way as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I was to ask you then for a particular high, would it be that moment when you're on the Crown Range between Wanaka and Queenstown, or is there a particular track off-road that took your fancy as well?
There are quite a few. I mean, in terms of the riding though, I really loved the Timber Trail because I'm not the most technical mountain bike rider at all, and with a fully loaded bike, like it's quite hard to keep your balance. So some of the more gnarly stuff was a bit stressful, whereas I found the Timber Trail had the perfect balance of it being in the bush, completely isolated, and still amazing climbs in there, and still all of this, but without being, super adrenaline focused where you're just worried about, falling off a cliff, or like had a bit of a near miss in the bridge to nowhere where my bike landed, like I'd fallen off quite a few times that day actually. And then on this one bluff that had no sign to get off, I misjudged a, rock in the ground and I ended up, my bike almost fell off. I pulled it on top of me and it was just kind of me on this thin trail with my bike on top of me, just just thinking, wow, I'm so glad I didn't go over. And someone actually unfortunately passed away on that trail about a week after we did it, which it was horrible to hear, but also, validating the fear that I was experiencing in that moment. Yeah, there is danger to this as well.
Am I right to assume then that with so much off-road and the terrain of New Zealand as well, like, you're talking about the Timber Trail being something where you could feel like maybe you were a bit more relaxed in cycling?
Yeah, yeah.
You weren't sort of holding onto the handlebars, leaning back way past your seat all the time, trying to maintain your balance.
Oh, some of the time, but
Perhaps some of the time you were, but I imagine that there certainly would have been trails where that would have been the case. Were there ever moments where you were just like stopped in your tracks almost thinking, what on earth, how, where am I, how am I going to do this? Or
oh, for sure. Yeah, like there were definitely points where we both had to walk. There were points where we had gotten to the point that we were already having to walk and we get three flat tires between two bikes and then the pump doesn't work and then there's no reception and we're like on the way to pick up our PLB so we don't even have that yet and this there's things like that happened. Again, you take turns looking after each other, being the one that's all right with the situation until you through it. It's part of the whole thing. And I mean, New Zealand is a very safe country, at least. I mean, you can get lost and you can get stuck, but in terms of actual dangerous wildlife, I would much rather get stuck in some of the ranges in New Zealand than in like the Rockies or something where I don't know, where there's bears or God knows what. I don't know.
I often joke that as an Australian, sometimes we're proud of our dangerous animals, but I must say we don't have bears in Australia. That would scare me more on a tour than, say, a snake or a spider.
Oh, I mean, snakes would still get me off the trail.
New Zealand is blessed because there are no snakes there, correct?
Yeah, there are no snakes. There's barely even bed spiders. There's no wolves, bears. There's nothing really. I mean, until people got there, it was just birds, some lizards, some marine life.
Yeah. So, what was it like then when you have a trip that has a sort of intermission, part one and part two? What was it like arriving at the end of part two? Was it a satisfaction in an achievement reached, or was there sort of were you ready for it to be over? I guess that's probably a better way of putting the question.
Yeah, there was definitely celebration. I mean, and a bit of disbelief as well, because again, like when I had the idea for this, I didn't imagine it would actually happen. So getting to the end of it and seeing the sign at the bottom and yeah, just arriving, it felt amazing really, and I was really proud of both of us. And yeah, I think at that time, I mean, we went pretty hard with the with the South Island, we did a lot of Ks and not much time. I think I was ready for a break at the end there, but then yeah, like not long after I started getting the bug again, I remember I got into a YouTube hole about the Tour Divide, which is Canada to Mexico. I'd completely caught the bug for it, and I think Rose Brie afterwards, she was kind of like never again, whereas I was thinking, let's just do this all the time.
Which I guess explains then, let's do this all the time. I guess then you finish your trip in New Zealand and then you've made your way to London. Now, did you make your way to London as a destination to start your second cycle tour, or were you living in London at the time when you decided to go on a cycle tour?
Actually, neither of them. After the TA, yeah, life kind of got back to normal. I worked as a software developer for a few years, and then pretty much exactly a year ago, or yeah, just a week under a year ago, I left New Zealand with, I quit my job, I sold all my stuff as Kiwis sometimes do, did the old reset, and actually, I went first to the Netherlands. I had a backpack which was half full of festival gear, my favorite party clothes, and half full of hiking equipment. And I had no plans really, except for a couple of festival tickets and a vague idea that I would like to go hiking in some mountains. Yeah, after a couple of festivals, I was in a friend's van, and actually, we were driving through your part. We were going through the French Pyrenees, and I saw a bunch of people, in their lycra on their road bikes riding up these hills, and it just looked like so much fun. And I was thinking back to the tours that I did with Brie, and I just, I wanted what they had, and so I stayed in my friend's van and went all the way back to London with them. They were going to drop me in Paris, but then I vaguely started to try and buy a bike online, and I don't speak French. I went all the way back to London instead, just so I could have the luxury of buying a bike in English and staying with my mate Rich, who very kindly let me stay there for the next 3 weeks. And yeah, it was basically 3 weeks between thinking, oh, I want to buy a bike again, and leaving London heading east. So in that time, I found a secondhand bike. I acquired some old gear that people didn't need anymore, and I made some gear as well, and bought some other bits that I needed, like lights and stuff, and yeah, and then set off. And because I'd already done the hard part, the big part, the getting the time to do it and the freedom to do it, and leaving New Zealand. And I'd prepared for these trips before, so I kind of knew the gear that I needed. This time I used panniers because a friend had some old ones that they weren't using, and that's why I used them. Because in our on our TA setups, it was more the light kind of bike packing with a saddlebag and mountain bike and this kind of thing. But yeah, it was very spontaneous actually.
Can I just say, the Pyrenean resident in me absolutely loves it. These mountains of mine obviously struck a chord with you. And
Yeah, good choice of place to live.
I guess 3 weeks to buy a bike, get the gear, make the decision. You knew you were starting in London and the goal was just to head east. Was the goal always to get to Turkey, or was the goal was it time-based or country-based? Or
I didn't really have any restrictions other than it was coming to the end of July and I would eventually hit cold weather. As a Kiwi, you can't spend so much time in the Schengen zone, which is most of Europe. And I'd already spent a month of that. So I knew that I had to go quickly across at least Western Europe until I got to the Balkans. And actually, the Balkans were my goal for the first while. And then actually, I saw someone post on Reddit that they'd just finished London to Istanbul, and I thought, oh man, I've always wanted to go to Turkey. And I looked at the map and I saw Bulgaria in the way and thought, oh, like, what's another country? And from that point forth, I was kind of like, oh, why not do all of continental Europe? And yeah, went for it.
Another key difference then between your first trip and this trip from London to Istanbul is that you were travelling on your own for this trip.
Yeah.
What was that like to first settle into?
A little bit tough, to be honest. It was way more different than I expected. I thought, oh, I've done tours before, but yeah, it's an entirely different ball game. I also thought I'd meet other cyclists on the way, but out of about 70 days on my bike, I spent, I think, probably in total 2 of them with other people. It was a lot of alone time. I mean, one of the reasons that I was traveling alone in the first place, even with my backpack, was that I wasn't very good at spending any time alone. I'm a very social person and I was always around people. And then this was definitely taking it to the extreme, just being like, right, so it'll just be the road from now on. And also not having a SIM card as well changed things too, because I wasn't in contact with people during the day. At a certain point, I noticed that when I was stopping for food breaks, I would check social media and this kind of thing, and it'd take me out of the moment. So for probably like the second 2/3 of the trip, I also didn't have a data connection on my phone. So it was really proper isolation. But it taught me so much.
And immersive as well.
Absolutely. It taught me so much. And now I really love my own company and feel a lot stronger because of it.
And you absolutely should. Because the other thing is, I'm thinking, to those times where you're on your own, you don't have any data on your phone, you don't have that quick access to a buddy or a friend to call or to transport you away from your current moment to their life as a distraction even. But you're also, by that stage, in countries where the language is totally foreign as well.
And, I got a bit better at doing this, but sometimes I was a little bit slow to download that next language on Google Translate, and it definitely caught me out a few times. But yeah, I mean, I did things like, I downloaded my maps, I downloaded music, I was listening to audiobooks for a lot of the time because I started listening to them on this trip, actually. It blew my mind, realizing that I could just have the absolute world expert on exactly the next thing I want to learn about, sharing, often in their voice, a completely edited, perfect summary of their findings in this thing as I bike along for, if you're doing a 12-hour day on the bike, you can listen to a whole book if it's not a super long one. And it's like absolutely incredible just to have access to all this knowledge. Just, you can pause it when you like. It's crazy. I spent a lot of time being really grateful for audiobooks.
Do you think your interactions with other locals then in country were different because you were travelling on your own? And do you think they interacted with you differently?
Quite a few people were a bit worried about me, thinking like, oh, what are you running away from? Or often people would say, oh, what's your relationship with your parents like? Is it all good? And I'd be like, yep, they're very supportive and proud. And they'd be somehow surprised. Or, sometimes it did get really annoying actually. I'd ask a local, say, hey, do you think it's all right if I camp in these trees over there? Because, it's always good to ask. And they'd say, are you alone? I'd say yes. They'd say no. And this kind of thing. And it's like, I don't want your opinion on whether you think it's safe for me to camp alone. I want to know if I can camp here. And this kind of thing. And I think it both worked for and against me, because sometimes that meant, okay, maybe more offers to enter someone's home, to have dinner with their family, to sleep in their garden, whatever. But on the other hand, it did have, there were interactions with people that I was very uncomfortable with as well. And especially in the first half, I had a lot of people saying, like, don't do that, you shouldn't do that alone, you haven't seen the world, you don't know. And I remember thinking, no, screw you, I can do this. But kind of the closer I got to the end, actually stuff did go wrong. And for some of those times, I did wish I was with someone else. And I think it is like also not super wise to just ignore all of that advice either. So I think there's some kind of balance where you can still be empowered but also informed of, yeah, it can be a bit more dangerous when you're alone as a woman on the road. People can take advantage of it. People are out there sometimes without your best interests at heart. It was a hard thing to realize because I really, really wanted to be right about it being absolutely safe for me to do it alone because I just really think that most people are super great, but there's still a couple out there that
There were just some moments which had you feeling more vulnerable than you'd potentially like to have been.
And I'd still do a tour alone again, for sure. But I think I would really seriously I'd just think about it a bit more in terms of where I'm going and how I want to be feeling as well. Because, there were times when I started being around people again, like I had to kind of like integrate back to socializing and this kind of thing. And I realized, oh, I'm laughing again. And things that I didn't realize I'd stopped doing really. Yeah.
Even just other things, and I know this is totally different, but maybe you'll appreciate it anyway. It's different things that you don't realise you've missed until you hear it. So, for example, we were talking earlier, you were talking about your friend that you did your tour with in New Zealand, and she's a swimmer, and you were saying how, she just packs her togs. I know what togs are, being an Aussie.
Yeah.
Togs are swimmers, but other people maybe not know them. But it just reminded me that I haven't heard that phrase for ages. It was like, oh, wow, you're away from it. And so that's very, very different to what you're talking about. But in a way, it's the same. Like, until it's sort of starkly in front of you and something sort of puts it into your mind, you don't realise, oh my gosh, I've not done this, or I haven't been laughing, or I have missed this.
Yeah. I started to have a lot of problems with the dogs the further I got along. And there were quite a few weeks where I was just so afraid for so much of the time because I'd been chased by so many really territorial, really angry dogs that that was the closest I'd felt to giving up. And I wonder if I had someone else there to, throw some stones or, be quicker with the water bottle or this kind of thing, whether that would have changed much about, so much fear around things like the dog.
And I guess if you've had more than just one incident as well, and something like a dog attack or a, not necessarily an attack, but, coming across farm dogs that don't want you there and in a pack.
I mean, one did bite me. It got its whole jaw around my calf.
Oh, wow. What country were you in at that point?
That was in Greece.
One of my podcast guests, Paul Datilli, he had a video in one of his YouTube clips where he had 11 dogs chasing him at one time in Greece, and I just could not imagine that inner fear.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's definitely something primal in there.
Did you develop a strategy in how to deal with dogs after a point in time, or?
Yeah, well, at the start, I would ask everyone that spoke all right English that I came across. I would say, hey, these dogs, how do you deal with them? And people were just like, oh, I think they get more aggressive towards bikes. So people were saying things like, oh, use water, this kind of thing. But often that didn't work, or there wasn't time to, if you're already being chased, it's like, how am I going to do this thing? I also kind of went to social media and asked, how do people deal with them? And also got people saying things like water and stones and not to make eye contact with the dog. And actually, I did end up finding that it would help if I slowed down, if I knew I was going to approach one, actually get off my bike, put the bike between me and the dog, walk slowly, don't look at it. And if it starts to hassle me, just talking to it in a calm tone, like, hey dog, like, it's all right. I'm just saying hi. I know you're territorial. Just trying to talk to it in a calm way. And I think that it was better doing that, but sometimes they just wouldn't leave me alone, and I'd have to just ride back down the hill the way I came and wait for a car and get out my Google Translate and say, please help with the dogs, and get the car between me and the dog. And yeah, the dogs were a big reason why I went. When I got to Greece, I actually went around the entire coast down to Athens and then back up towards Thessaloniki along the mainland for most of the way, rather than going across the mountains. Part of the reason I did that was I was too scared to go into the mountains alone with all the dogs around. So I just took like 1,000-kilometer detour instead, which seems a bit ridiculous, but I also love the beach.
There were positives to be had from the detour.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because actually, and it's something that you talk about there, like, you love the mountains, and we spoke about them a little bit already, but Some people when they cycle tour don't look forward to when the road goes uphill. I feel just looking through some of your travels, Tess, that you are very much the other way. Would I be right in assuming that?
Yeah, I love a climb. Those are my favorite days. Just going up it for most of the day and then going down it for the rest. And the endorphins, the rush when you're at the top is just, it's something that I can't compare to many other things. Just when you're fully in flow and fully in focus. And yeah, I get even with mountain biking, like I'm one of those weirdos that actually prefers the uphill because I think I feel safer with it as well. I think I feel a lot more in control when I'm climbing hills as opposed to going down something at speed. Yeah, I don't know. I just love it.
I mean, obviously, the way that you made your way through Europe, you would have had to cross through the Alps at some stage, I'm guessing. What was it like going across big proper mountains?
Oh, it was incredible. I crossed the Alps in Austria, so once I got to Germany, I went through the Schwarzwald, through the Black Forest, and then across into Austria and then through the Alps. And oh, it was just so gorgeous, and it felt like I was in the Sound of Music, and I was on a Eurovelo route for that part as well, so there were actually other riders on the route. I mean, there's nothing that compares to passing an e-bike when you're on your fully loaded gravel bike. That feels amazing every time, so it was also a good one.
That's an empowering moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I did have some mechanicals in those mountains though. I can do the basics on a bike, but actually I need to do some more courses because I definitely don't have the amount that I should have for doing tours as long as I do. But my brakes stopped working in the Alps.
Kind of an issue in the mountains.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it was also raining a little bit as well. So it wasn't really a good time for it. I think it was a Sunday morning. So it was Sunday night in New Zealand. And I called the one bike mechanic friend I have, Darcy, the absolute legend. And he answered miraculously. He was just playing piano and said, "Oh, this is random. How can I help?" And he talked me through how to fix my brakes just off this dodgy internet connection as I leant my phone on the bin as I was using the tools and
I love it. I love it. See, this is problem solving 101, isn't it? And you've got to go on a bike tour to solve the problems you don't realize you're about to have. But somehow
yeah.
that problem solving mindset comes in there. Not dissimilar to you waiting for a car to help usher you through past the dogs in a way. It's a different problem. One's more scary than the other, although for some people descending an alpine mountain without brakes would be quite fear inducing as well.
Yeah.
Now, you actually did take a short period of time off from your cycle tour in Europe because you were volunteering on a boat as well, weren't you? On a boat or on a yacht?
Yeah, on a yacht, on a small yacht. That was just really great timing. I mentioned at the start that I started this trip with festivals and not many other plans. And someone that I met at Nowhere, which is the kind of like the Spanish version of Burning Man, invited me when they knew I was traveling and didn't have so much to do. And they invited me while I was planning this trip, saying, "Hey, we're planning this festival on water for a week. Do you want to come volunteer and cook on the boat?" Of course, I wanted to spend a week on a party boat sailing around Montenegro. So I said yes and kind of like looked backwards I knew that I had to go quickly across the Schengen zone anyway, so I thought it would be a good goal to get to Montenegro by the middle of September, and also figured that after a month and a bit of biking and solitude that I would be ready to see some people I knew. So yeah, ended up making it with a day to spare, one day, and hopped on the boat for a week, left my bike at the port, had a great time cooking and swimming and resting my legs and meeting some new people, and that really refreshed me for the next part. Yeah, but actually, a few days in, I was thinking, God, I just really miss my bike. I wish I was biking right now.
I was actually going to ask you that because it is one of those things. It's probably a reflection of how your bike tour is going. If when you have set aside time to be not on your bike, do you have itchy feet and you want to get back on there and keep moving forward? Or are you happy to just like, I'm so happy I'm not on the bike today, and each day you're waking up sort of energized by not having to pedal your way through to another sort of destination?
Yeah, no, whenever I stopped, I missed it. Yeah. And I remember thinking as well, just being while riding as well, like trying to figure out like, oh man, how can I make this the full-time thing that I'm doing? Like, how can I make this my, it felt so much more aligned with who I am as a person than, yeah, it made less and less sense to sit 40 hours a week behind a computer.
I mean, you have hinted that the Tour Divide is something that you feel you will ultimately be at the start line for. Yeah, that's a long distance tour that's, I guess, part of an event. But since finishing your Euro tour, has there sort of been, do you have a mind for different types of trips, or is that the one that you think you'll go on to next?
It's not necessarily the one I think I'll do next because I think, I don't like to fly so much, and I think geographically some other ones might make more sense. Eventually, I would love to do as many of them as possible, like things like Cairo to Cape Town. That would be absolutely the dream tour for me, but I know that one I don't want to do alone. I think just having someone to share those memories with, if nothing else, and the safety aspect, I would love to do it. Ideally, especially with another woman as well, because I feel like sometimes when you're biking along as a woman and you're with a guy, like sometimes the people that you stop and talk to, I can just get the sense that they assume that it's his thing and that you're just kind of along for the ride. Whereas I want there to be no mistake that that's not the case. And also, like trying to empower the women in the places that we're going through and this kind of thing as well, like it's pretty important. But yeah, the next one that I really had on my mind was I would love to start in Istanbul again and head east, riding towards roughly India and then seeing what happened. Yeah, that would be a dream. But I've stopped in Berlin for a while to make some money and have friends for a while and just kind of like be a part of society for some time before before going like feral bushwoman again.
Do you think then, so I'm sort of thinking, Turkey, Central Asia, Pamir Highway, Pakistan,
Yeah,
India, maybe that's
yeah,
the sort of touring route you're thinking of there.
yeah, exactly.
Do you think you would be comfortable doing that solo as a female? And is that sort of what you're envisaging will happen?
I don't know if comfortable is the right word for it. I think I would feel probably a lot of discomfort, but I not in a way that would stop me from doing it. And yeah, when I was like, so after I got to Istanbul, I went and spent the next 6 months basically on the beach in Morocco for the surf season. And during that, I was really thinking a lot about this next ride. And I kind of came to the decision that yes, I would do it alone. If I called Brie and I said, hey, would you do this with me? And she said, oh, my mum would kill me.
But would she kill her if she was just with you? Like, maybe she'd kill her if she was on her own. Maybe she wouldn't kill her if she knew that she was with her cycle touring buddy from way back.
But yeah, I think if I couldn't find the right person to do it with, yeah, I think I would absolutely do it alone. I had a chat to someone really helpful that I found in a bike forum who had done it. She biked around, well, she hadn't done the whole thing, but she'd biked around India for a year and a half alone, and she absolutely loved it. And I kind of, I put out a call for women that had done this route and asking them their experiences, and got a sea of men saying, don't do that. And then a small handful of women that had actually done it saying, I've done it and it was fine, or it was great, or there were these things, but definitely do it. And it was like just the comparison between those is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. And, I'm listening to you there, and what it's reminding me of are similar guests to yourself, Tess, who have done fantastic things as a solo female, and it's reminding me of some other solo female guests that I've been fortunate enough to listen to and learn about their stories. And I'm thinking of guests like Madeline Hoffman, Dr. Florence Cattell, Nikki Ray, and Claire Wyatt. And I love all of my guests equally, but those ones there just stick out front of mind because they're all people that are travelling in ways that people have stopped and said, well, what you're doing is dangerous and you shouldn't be going there. And I definitely encourage other women who are perhaps bombarded with these thoughts to, as you've just said there yourself, Tess, to sort of maybe question where these views are coming from others and seek out the stories of women who have said, okay, but, and have done regardless. I think you mentioned earlier travel informed and be informed about things and make informed decisions. And I think that things can still happen for you in a safe manner by doing that as well. I certainly know in speaking to guests that there is definitely a big community of cycle tourers who have groups. There's WhatsApp groups available as well for cycle tourers travelling in these remote areas where you can get in touch.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you need company, there are often people there to have company. I think one of my guests, Ed Hawes, he rode from London all the way to New Zealand. And he mentioned that he felt for the majority of his tour he actually wasn't alone, because he did often seek out the company of other cycle tourers along the way there as well. And not all male tourers by any stretch either. He had some female company, some other awesome women on bikes travelling in this manner too. So I'm really excited to think about what's next for you.
Oh, me too.
It's under your skin.
Yeah, it's just unfortunately it can be a little bit tricky making it work with the rest of the societal expectations that we have in this point in time. But yeah, I'm trying to make it work. So we'll see. We'll see what's next. It's definitely not the last tour I'm gonna do.
I feel like we've skipped through so much of your trip because, you know, that trip
Yeah.
through Europe, I think it was 5,300 kilometres. So many. How many countries did you travel across in that time?
11.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the impossible here, where I'm going to ask you for favourites. So, favourite country?
Oh, it's so hard. I guess
Hmm.
uh favorite country. Oh, I loved biking through maybe Slovenia. It was just so beautiful. I mean, it was short actually. It's like not a huge country, but just like all of the landscape there was absolutely incredible. Mountains, lakes, just like, when you feel like you're properly in nature rather than kind of like in a park.
Yeah, definitely.
Either that or Albania. Albania was also very like amazing. It felt like more of an adventure than anywhere else because of some of the lack of infrastructure and some of the ways that my map sent me wrong and some of the wild camping spots that I loved. I think Albania was also, yeah, maybe even my favorite actually.
So, you did mention wild camping there because you did. Was the majority of your time spent wild camping? Was there a mix of warm showers perhaps in there as well, or?
Yeah, it was a mix. It was a mix. It was partly wild camping, partly warm showers, partly hostels when I just really needed a shower and to wash my clothes and there were no warm showers around. And yeah, but I did have a tent with me. Yeah, did manage to find some awesome spots.
And if I had to ask you for a favourite spot, and again, another impossible question, but if you cast your mind back to maybe favourite spots, what was that like?
That one's actually a bit easier for me because I do have a favorite. A beach. Oh, I'm gonna ruin the secret. A beach that I found in Albania that I found on iOverlander, which is like an app that you can find camping spots and people say, oh, it used to be fun to wild camp here, now it's not. But like they update it over time. And I found this one beach that said, awesome camping spot, but bit of a hippie vibe, or like like a couple of people had mentioned kind of a hippie vibe there, and I thought, oh, I mean, I've got to check it out. And so I went there, and I always think that the best beaches are down the worst roads, and it was definitely true on that account. And the last couple of kilometers were, I was basically carrying my bike. But when I got down there, oh my gosh, the water was just this beautiful blue green. The sun was setting like the most ridiculous sunset. I'd just come down this amazing pass, one of those ones that you're climbing all day and you're climbing into the forest the whole time, and then you get to the top and you just see the sea on the other side of this cliff, and it just all exposes itself to you, and then you just go basically like super long. It's still a road, but it kind of felt like a very long switchback just down the face of this like very steep side where you're just watching the afternoon sun, and then to end at this just ridiculously incredible beach. And it was the start of the off season as well, so it was quite quiet, but there were, a handful of us that would do a bonfire on the beach every night, and there were caves to sleep in, and then the caves were super nice ones as well, like they were deep enough that you could sleep in them, but shallow enough that the afternoon sun got into the back of the cave during the day. So it was warm and dry, and climbers would show up because it's like a popular climbing spot, and there's a canyon that you can walk 5 hours into. Yeah, it's paradise basically.
I feel like we don't need the exact location. I feel like this bit of paradise needs to just be secret squirrel stuff, but maybe when I get off this recording, you can tell me.
Yeah, I mean, if you look hard enough, you'll definitely find it.
Just hearing you describe that, To me, that's exactly 100,000,000% what traveling on a bicycle tour is all about. It's discovering these places that totally probably just leave you mouth wide open, jaw-droppingly beautiful, and
Yeah.
obviously so good that you didn't just stay there a night, you stayed there a few days. So I love this.
Before that point, I kept on being like, nah, I've got to go, got to go. But then that was just after the boat trip, so I didn't actually have a time pressure anymore, and I was out of the Schengen zone. So yeah, I left after a few days to get more supplies, and I was going to stay another week there. But then someone arrived at the campfire at night, and they invited me to a gathering of hippies taking place like 50 kilometers down the road, which I mean, very true to what I read on iOverlander. Yeah, so then they said, it's the full moon tomorrow, make sure you're there by the full moon. And so, like, who am I to turn down an invitation with a hand-drawn map around the fire that's telling me to get there by the full moon? Like, of course I'm going to follow that. Because, I mean, I'm seeking absurdity as much as anything else in these trips. I just love being in situations where I'm like, how did I end up here? But also, this is super weird and great, and I don't know what to expect, but in a way that I really enjoy. So yeah, I left only because I had full moon plans. Otherwise, I was going to stay another week there, and just maybe I would have never left. I don't know. I met people that had been there for months.
Wow. Is it somewhere that you would cycle to again?
I would absolutely go back. I mean, I don't know if I'd cycle the same roads or whether I'd hitchhike some of it or go through different countries or, ride down to Italy. I've never ridden through Italy and then go across on the boat because you can do that. But yeah, I'd for sure go back.
Do you ever find yourself, I know that we mentioned before we pressed record that you took your journal out and you've been reading through it. Do you find yourself just randomly picking up your old travel journals and actually reading through and reminding yourself of what you've done?
Oh, every now and then I feel like it gives me really good perspective on what I thought was important when I reduced my life down to about as simple as it could be. And now, I mean, I've just moved to Berlin. I've been here for 3 months. And being, in a city where there's suddenly every imaginable distraction that didn't exist on my bike tour or in the 6 months afterwards that I was basically on the beach. I feel like it's especially important for me now trying to keep that clear headedness and knowing my priorities and knowing what's important and what's just a bonus, and rather than getting all swept up in how complicated life can become when your goal for the day isn't just to pedal 100 kilometers. It's not something I'm doing all the time, but for sure I look at it every now and then and laugh at the absurdity of it and kind of bask in the strength a little bit as well and just remind myself like, yeah, like what you're doing right now isn't so hard.
Being able to look back on it with hindsight and come out feeling strong, that's a great feeling too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited for where I'm going to ride next as well. I think it kind of proved like I didn't know how much harder it would be to do this stuff alone because I was so lucky to have Brie in New Zealand, but now I know I can do it. I think I realized at a point when I was riding, I think in Austria or something like that. I remember riding like I mean, before I left New Zealand, I was a super, super anxious person as well for a lot of years. And I think this may have actually finally snapped me out of it. It seems silly, but realizing whatever happens, I can get back on a bike, take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and just figure it all out and take the space and just use it as processing time. And that I find a really calming thing to know that it's kind of this big reset button that I can hit and just find that clarity again. I think it comes back even, I find it even sometimes. I've finally been reunited with my bike. We had some time apart, and even riding it around Berlin, sometimes I just get on it, and then by the time I get off, I just feel so much better about everything as well. Yeah, there's definitely some magic in there.
There's a few things there. There's a part where discovering a new place on a bike, it's a great way to discover something. Slow travel is amazing. Getting somewhere under your own steam is great. But there is also that, I don't know whether medicinal is the right word, but there's something nourishing for us where the act of pedaling a bike helps us deal and process with whatever's going on in our heads, and it can help us solve problems or forget problems, whichever one we need from. I really get that sense of magic that sort of has for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it has to be biking. I think it can be walking. I think it can be just doing anything with your body that helps you get back into your body and out of your head, and feeling more and thinking less and these kinds of things.
We talked about, low moments with dogs and whatnot. You had some pretty stressful moments on your trip as well. Your passport was stolen at one stage too.
Yeah, so that wasn't even just my passport actually. Yeah, it was one of the only days that I spent riding with someone else. We found this wild camping spot that night. Beautiful lake, very rural, no one around. There was kind of like a little cafe bar thing on one end of it, and the the spot that we'd kind of looked at on satellite was a bit further along. And when we went past, there was this guy who was, he didn't speak any English, but he was trying to be a bit too helpful and trying to like push my bike for me and this kind of thing. We were like, no, thanks, but see you later. And then we went and camped on the other side of the lake, and I left most of my stuff outside the tent. And I remember waking up in the morning and looking at my friend and saying, "Did you move my bags? What's going on?" And both of my panniers were gone, with all of my tools, my raincoat, like my pump and this kind of thing. My tent was in there as well because we slept in the one tent. The bags themselves, the panniers, and my Kindle, and yeah, and my passport obviously as well. And I just, it was so much to process at once, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in rural Albania. I wasn't even close to Tirana, and I remember borrowing a phone and looking up how to get a New Zealand passport, and it was like $600 just for a temporary one, and you've got to wait weeks. And I just remember thinking, oh, okay, I guess I'm finding a way to get to Tirana, and then waiting there until I can leave again because I don't have ID and I'm kind of stuck in this country. And yeah, it was pretty surreal. and But I think it quite quickly got to there was nothing I could do at that point except for to just kind of accept it and think about how to move forward. But then it got super weird again because we went back to this like little cafe bar. I don't even know what you would call it.
Yeah, like a taverna or something.
Yeah, on the other side of the lake, and used Google Translate to chat to. There were 3 or 4 people sitting there, and said, "Have you seen anything dodgy? My bags got taken, blah blah blah." They didn't seem to really care at all. And then we were about to leave, and then I said, "Oh, why don't let's just tell them my passport's in it, and just, so they know how serious it is." And then it was almost like the mood shifted, and they seemed to be taking it a lot more seriously, but they still kind of were like, "Can't help you," but they took our number, and we biked away. And a couple of kilometers later, a car comes up next to us and tells us to turn around. And they're saying, like passport, like passport. And so we follow them all the way back to this cafe, and then they hand me back my passport, a bra, and nothing else. And I remember just being so happy that I'd gotten my passport back, but so confused where all my other stuff was. Where are my tools? Where's my tent? Where's my raincoat? And it was showing them gratitude, but then, it was also quite intense because the guy that we'd seen the night before, they were physically and what sounded like verbally, I don't speak Albanian, but abusing this guy. And they were hitting him, they were just getting super angry with him. And I kind of had to be like, yeah, we've still got this other stuff. And there was this kind of awful cycle of I would ask for something, and then they would kind of like abuse this guy until he ran away to a different hiding spot and then came back. And then they would say, and I'd say thank you, and then they would be like, "Is that all your stuff?" And I wouldn't want to say, "No, that's not all my stuff," but that was the case, and I really needed these things to move forward. Like everything you carry on a bike is important. It's not like there's stuff that you can just do without. And so, yeah, he went to like 3 or 4 different hiding spots. My tools were open, my tent was out of its thing, and it was wet, and yeah, I eventually got almost all of it back. But yeah, we later found out that apparently the guy I was cycling with that day, he said he met some Albanian people recently, and he mentioned the story to them. And they said that area or that lake is kind of known that people mess with tourists there. Yeah, I mean, amazingly though, got my passport back, so I wasn't just stuck and had a tent again. And
Yeah.
yeah, but that was that was definitely a weird one, and not, yeah, definitely not in the good way. That's not the kind of absurdity that I'm seeking, but I mean, it's amazing that they gave most of it back.
I'm sure that was a stressful journal entry to be writing about there.
Yeah.
Like, when you look back on it in hindsight, you probably look at it maybe with some different lenses on now as well. But I'm sure that you had countless experiences with people, with the kindness of strangers, I'm sure also made its way to you on your trip.
Oh, 100%. And for every person that would, cause any amount of harm, there were 100 others that did the exact opposite. So I definitely did not come out of this trip thinking less of the world. It was very much the opposite. I mean, I went into it with a lot of faith in humanity already. Otherwise, I don't think I would have done it. But I was kind of very much proven right, I guess. Basically, all the other cyclists that I've talked to have said the same thing, though, that it's just the help out there is just so abundant and so beautiful. And yeah.
It's another reason to get back on the bike and travel in this way as well, is to remind ourselves that there is greatness in humanity too.
Yeah, definitely.
Tess, I often think when someone's undertaken a trip like you have, and there's so many stories we could drill into, and different places we could talk about, beautiful beaches and mountain vistas. I feel like there's always just such a small amount of time to ask the right questions. So what's a question I haven't asked you that I should have asked you about this trip?
Oh, the road into Istanbul. Everyone told me not to take it. What's it called? The I-100 or whatever it is. The D-100, whatever it's called. Yeah, everything I read about it was like, don't do it. And I would now give that same advice having done it.
Are there alternatives?
Well,
What's the other option?
my understanding is that if you stick as close to the coast as you can, that it's better. And I did that for part of it, but there was also part of it that I could see no way around. And also, yeah, for a lot of it as well, by the time I was getting into Istanbul, my flight was, I think, the next day or the day after. I had a time limit at the end because one of my cousins was coming from New Zealand to Morocco to meet me there, and I really wanted to be there in time to see her. But yeah, this road, I almost pulled over. I mean, I did pull over many times and considered how I would even get myself and my bike in a cab to go the rest, like the last 30K or something. And I just remember feeling the most in danger of the whole trip as the closer you get to Istanbul, the more and more and more cars, the less they care about you, and the smaller the shoulder is to the point where it basically disappears. Yeah, a recipe for, yeah, just stick to the coast.
I guess that segues nicely to my next question then. How did you feel arriving into Istanbul then? Because Istanbul was your final destination, am I correct?
Yeah.
So you've reached the end of your trip. What was the feeling of getting there? I'm guessing, wow, I survived something, given the preceding 30 odd kilometres of that road. But what were you thinking when you landed there?
Yeah, I mean, I was happy to be alive, that's for sure. But also, yeah, it was a mixed one because the final few days were quite hard. It was mostly on highways. I was still kind of the dogs in Turkey actually weren't as bad as in Greece, but I was still kind of on that kind of fair streak from all the dog situations. And it was also kind of, I felt so happy to be there and to just like eat all the baklava and just call my family and this kind of thing. But it was also quite weird just like checking into a hostel and you get in there and someone's like, "Oh, where have you come from?" And I'm like, well, actually, I just arrived here from London. I just biked here from London." And then they're like, "Oh, so where are you going?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, here, just finished." Like finishing one of those things alone and not having Bree there to celebrate with, saying, "Oh, we did it." It was pretty funny just to kind of just arrive to a hostel. And yeah, I definitely celebrated with some food and this kind of thing, but also I find cities overwhelming at the best of times. So I was a bit overwhelmed by Istanbul having.
Yeah, you definitely strike me as someone who is more at home in the countryside than in the city.
Yeah, definitely. Although I have just moved to a city, and I've got to say I am loving it because with the city, you also get just so many amazing creative people. And I mean, Berlin's quite a good one for green spaces and lakes. It's kind of like, it's almost like a lake district. And there's so much cycling infrastructure here that you can cycle kind of at night without lights and it still feels safe somehow because there are just cycleways all through the city and big bike communities and this kind of thing.
I'm just thinking back to something that scared you in your first trip. You said you didn't enjoy cycling at night, and now it's something that you're comfortable with.
When there's the infrastructure for it, it's a lot easier rather than when you're on the side of a highway thinking, where's my campsite?
Well, I am super stoked that where you are for the moment, and I say for the moment because I feel like another massive bicycle tour is in your future for sure.
I feel like that too.
You've got the bug, you've got the bike, you'll be pedaling to those green spaces like mad between now and then. But I am glad that you found a city that does allow you to at least cater for that cycling part of you as well.
Definitely. And because I'm trying to step away from software development because it just really did not make my soul happy. I have bought a sewing machine and I've been making bike bags here because I made my own gear before I did this trip and it held out for all 5,500 K. So, I mean, Berlin's a city of creativity and just making stuff happen and selling stuff at flea markets. So I've started making bike bags here and I'm really excited for how that's going as well. Yeah. So like, a bit of a shameless plug.
Is there a way that if our listeners are interested in something like this, how can they find out more about you? How can they find out more about these things?
Yeah, so testbikes.com or on Instagram at testbikes as well.
Oh, brilliant. I will definitely provide links to both of those in the show note.
Awesome.
No, Tess, I do have to wrap things up. You're the sort of person that I would quite happily chat to over a beer at a bonfire, draw maps with, and meet somewhere.
Likewise.
And I've really, really enjoyed this chat. There are two quick questions that I always finish my show with, and I ask this of all my guests. I definitely 100% know the answer to the first one. Feel I know the answer to the second one as well, but I'm going to ask them both regardless. So the first one is, if you're given the choice one day of having to cycle perpetually up a climb or perpetually cycle into a constant headwind, which one are you going to be choosing?
Uphill. Absolutely. Up a climb. Although, I mean, I'm from Wellington and it's the windiest city in the world, so I mean, by moving back to Wellington, I would kind of be choosing the second one.
Well, may you have a tailwind uphill regardless.
Thank you.
And my second question, Tess, is if you had given the choice one day that you'll be cycling for 4 hours, would you prefer to cycle for 4 hours on your own or 4 hours with other people?
Oh, it depends on the day, I think. Depends on what I need. Probably with other people. I love riding with others and I still don't spend so much time doing it, so I always cherish it when it happens. But either, I would just be happy to have 4 hours to bike. Yeah.
Just quickly, I wonder if prior to your Euro trip, prior to this trip that you did undertake on your own, whether the answer would have always been 100% 4 hours with other people. And maybe it's recently that you've realised that 4 hours on your own.
I think it probably would be 4 hours with other people because I love people.
And it's just interesting also, though, that it took a trip of travelling on your own to realise that you were comfortable with being in your own company as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Tess Meyer, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your story with Seek Travel Ride. I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed hearing you recount your amazing bicycle adventure tales as well. I know that I will certainly be keeping my eye on your socials to see what's coming up next. And who knows, maybe down the track we'll link up together again and we'll be talking about this amazing epic tour through Central Asia all the way to India.
Yeah, you can come if you want.
Oh, the Pamir Highway looks pretty mega. And I have to say, a country which, when I speak to so many of my guests, the Pamir Highway, the hospitality of the people and the beautiful culture of Iran, they are highlights that I keep hearing so much about. So who knows, maybe it is in my future as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed my time chatting there with Tess and learning about her approach to her bike adventures. You can really tell she is a free spirit and is just yearning for those immersive experiences and just discovering new places, people, cultures, and everything in between. I really wish Tess well on her future bike adventures. I know I will certainly be keeping an eye out for where the bike will take her. And for those interested in her bike packing bags, she is just at the start of setting her website up, so it should be live now. I have provided a link to it in the show notes. Thank you once again for supporting the show. If you want to be notified of when new episodes drop, be sure to subscribe to the podcast in your player app there. And a special thank you also to those people who have reached out and also given the show a rating and a review. It has helped the show to grow and reach an even bigger audience, and I'm really appreciative of all your support. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.